What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, week one for the Detroit Lions is less than 1 week away, and obviously with that being the case, the Detroit Lions very recently have cut down to just a 53-man roster. Of course, they started the preseason with 90, then after the first week they cut down to 85, after the second week they cut down to 80, and of course after the third week and prior to the first week of the regular season, the Detroit Lions needed to cut those 80 players down to 53 active roster members as well as 16 practice squad members. So today, we're going to look at the Detroit Lions' initial 53-man roster, analyze it, talk about the good, talk about the bad, talk about some of the good moves they made, and talk about some of the more questionable moves that were made, and really try to give an overview of this roster and see how competitive they may be in the 2021 season. Now, before we get into the video and before we start talking about the Detroit Lions' 53-man roster, if you're new to the channel and you're enjoying the content, please consider liking the videos and subscribing to the channel. It takes just 2 seconds out of you to do so. It's quick, it's free, and it is incredibly easy to do, and you would be helping the channel out more than you could possibly know. So if you could do that, take those 2 seconds to like and subscribe. I'd be greatly appreciative for it. But with all of that being said, and without any further ado, let's get right into taking a look at the Detroit Lions' initial 53-man roster.
So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
Now, of course, starting at the quarterback position, the Detroit Lions actually ended up keeping 3 quarterbacks for the NFL season. Of course, Jared Goff is going to be your quarterback 1. He was a given to make the roster. However, there was definitely a battle for the second and third quarterback positions, and there was a little bit of a question whether they would keep 2 or 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Now, the Detroit Lions ended up keeping 3 quarterbacks. They ended up keeping both Tim Boyle and David Blau on the active roster. Overall, not a surprise. If they were going to keep 3, then those were going to be the 3. The only question was really going to be, where were they going to keep 2 quarterbacks or were they going to keep 3? And of course, obviously, they ended up keeping a 3rd quarterback on the roster. However, Tim Boyle is out for the first couple weeks of the NFL season with a broken thumb. Now, the running back position, again, is very similar to the quarterback situation, very predictable. DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, and Jermar Jefferson all made the roster as the top 3 running backs. Jason Cabinda made the roster as the number 1 fullback, and I think the only real surprise here was Godwin Igwebuike making it as the running back 4. Now, not to say Godwin didn't have a great preseason, hit a couple touchdowns. I believe he led the Detroit Lions in touchdowns this preseason and looked really good all around. Looked like a solid receiving back, looked like a solid running back. Of course, found the end zone a couple times, which is something that is, obviously a very good thing for an NFL running back. So he was really the 4th running back. He was the only player in the running back room where I think people were like, wow, like that's a little surprising. But I don't think anybody's necessarily against Godwin being on the team because he did perform very well in preseason, and there is definitely an argument to be made that he was the best of the depth running backs in the preseason. Now, wide receiver was a little bit interesting. The Detroit Lions made a couple really interesting cuts at wide receiver. Right now, their wide receiver room going into week 1 looks like Tyrell Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, Quintez Cephus, Tom Kennedy, Trinity Benson, and KhaDarel Hodge. Now, KhaDarel Hodge and Trinity Benson were both not here during the preseason. Trinity Benson was a member of the Denver Broncos, and the Detroit Lions acquired him via trade. They believe they gave away a 5th and a 7th for Benson and a 6th round pick. Overall, I don't think they lost a lot of value in that. They may have even gained a little bit of value. I mean, if you want to look at it, you could just look at it as, you used a 5 and a 7 to, upgrade that 7 to a 6 and get a 5th and a player. Overall, there was not a lot of change in value. Some people are mad about the trade, saying that that 5th round pick is way too valuable. But if you really want to look at it, our 5th round pick from 2 years ago didn't even end up making the team, and Benson's on the team. So if you want to look at it from that way, there was very little value lost, if any at all. And then KhaDarel Hodge actually spent the preseason with the Cleveland Browns and had a very good preseason and was only cut because the Cleveland Browns have an incredibly deep roster. They have incredibly deep wide receiver core with OBJ, Jarvis Landry, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and a lot of other really good talent all throughout the depth of that receiving core. And KhaDarel Hodge was unfortunately just left left out, but that does not mean he's a bad player. He was cut more because of how good the Browns are, more so than how poor he actually is as a player. So the wide receiver core is a little different than we may have expected. Obviously, Williams, St. Brown, Raymond, and Cephas are all players we expected to be on the roster and obviously be on the field making plays for the Lions. But Tom Kennedy had a phenomenal preseason. He definitely earned a spot on the team. You have, obviously Benson and Hodge that both earned a spot apparently, and obviously didn't play for the Detroit Lions, but they were players that played very well in the preseason, showed a lot of really good skill, a lot of really good ability, and showed that they have the ability to help this football team win in the 2021 season. Now, tight end was a little bit of a different approach. The Detroit Lions currently only have 2 tight ends on the active roster, that being, of course, TJ Hockenson as the tight end 1 and Darren Fells as the tight end 2. A little bit surprising that the Lions only went with 2 tight ends. Obviously, if one gets hurt, then you're only down with 1 tight end, and you can't even physically run a 2 tight end set at that point, which I think was what a lot of Lions fans were hoping for, or maybe even expecting out of the Detroit Lions this year, was to run a lot of 2 tight end stuff, to run stuff with both Fells and Hockenson on the field at the same time. Obviously, if they get hurt, you can't do that. I believe the Detroit Lions do have a tight end or 2 on the practice squad that they could always pull up, so that is, of course, good for them for depth reasons. A little bit strange that they only went with 2 tight ends, but of course, if you're going to go with 2 tight ends, those are the best 2 to have. Now, on the offensive line, the Detroit Lions went very heavily on the lines. Both offensively and defensively, the Detroit Lions have, I believe, 20 players on just the lines alone. Now, starting on the offensive side of the ball, of course, Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, Halapaloe Vaitai, and Penei Sewell all made the active roster and are likely to be the starting 5 offensive linemen for this 2021 season. However, for depth reasons, or for depth purposes, the Detroit Lions also elected to keep Matt Nelson, Evan Brown, and Logan Stenberg as the 3 backup offensive linemen. Now, those guys are mostly interior players. Matt Nelson is a tackle. The other 2 are interior players, being both guards, but I believe they do have a little bit of versatility here and there as well. I think those were the best 3 offensive linemen in the preseason, at least by the backups. I thought Stenberg had a really solid preseason, to be totally honest. Evan Brown, I had no complaints with. Matt Nelson got beat a couple of times. Matt Nelson was not my favorite in the preseason as far as tackles, but he was the only other tackle that really played at a high enough level to warrant giving him a roster spot. And again, we talked about Tyrell Crosby. Tyrell Crosby did not earn his spot. Tyrell Crosby did not do enough in the preseason to beat out Matt Nelson because he simply wasn't on the field. So although Matt Nelson may not be the best option, he's the guy that earned the spot. He's the guy that worked for it, and he's the guy that earned it. Now, moving to the defensive line, this is where things got a little bit, I guess, strange, because there are a lot of defensive linemen on this team. Michael Brockers, Aleem McNeil, Deshaun Hand, Nick Williams, Levi Onwuzurike, John Pennicini, and Kevin Strong all made it as interior defensive linemen. And then Trey Flowers, Romeo Okwara, Julian Okwara, Austin Bryant, and Charles Harris all made it as edge rushers. There are 20 linemen on this team right now. If you consider the outside linebackers, the edge rushers, defensive linemen, which they are essentially going to be playing that role as, an edge rusher, a guy on the end of the line that is going to be rushing the passer. If you want to consider those guys defensive linemen, which I do because that's going to be the role that they play, the Detroit Lions are currently rostering 20 members that belong on the line. 20 of their 53-man roster, 20 players of the 53 players that they are allowed to take the field with in week 1 are players that play on the line. This is a very different approach to what we saw with Bob Quinn, to what we saw with Matt Patricia. They were guys that liked to flash. Those were guys that wanted to sell tickets. Those were guys that obviously got wide receivers and cornerbacks and the flashy skill positions. They did not stack up the lines like this. They tried. They gave it their best attempt. They didn't build up a horrible line per se, but at the end of the day, you can very clearly see that Brad Holmes' emphasis of the season, in obviously throughout the entire offseason, throughout the entire preseason, and now obviously with these roster cuts, has been build up and solidify the lines, and I think he did that here with those 20 players. Now, going into the 2021 season, the Detroit Lions are a little bit thin at the linebacker position, rostering just 5 middle linebackers. However, those 5 players, I believe, are the best 5 linebackers the Lions could have chosen from. They have, of course, Jamie Collins being that starting linebacker, Alex Anzalone, who was just recently named a captain of the defense, which is a little bit interesting. Derek Barnes, the 4th-round rookie and the preseason star. Jalen Reeves-Maybin was a little bit surprised surprising to me, but I don't know who else would have beat him out. I guess I would have preferred maybe Sean Deion Hamilton, but just like Tyrell Crosby, Sean Deion Hamilton did not play, and I believe he's actually on IR, so he is on the roster still technically, but of course he's not going to play for the foreseeable future. And then Anthony Pittman also made the roster. I thought Anthony Pittman was a very good linebacker in the preseason. He definitely earned a spot on this team, and I thought it was a really good roster move to keep Anthony Pittman here for the foreseeable future. Now, at cornerback, the Detroit Lions are also a little bit thin. However, I don't think it is a bad cornerback room at all. Jeff Okudah is leading the way as the cornerback 1. Amani Oruwariye is the cornerback 2. Iffy made it. AJ Parker made it. Jerry Jacobs made it. And actually, the only surprising one would be Bobby Price, who made the roster as the last cornerback, who actually made a transition from safety to cornerback this offseason. And obviously, he has all the physical tools to do so. He's big, he's fast, he's strong, he has incredibly long arms, he's got a great wingspan, and even though he did give up a big play in week 1, I thought he also made a lot of plays in the air, and I thought he made a lot of positive plays for the Detroit Lions at the cornerback position as well. So it didn't surprise me that he made the roster necessarily, but he definitely is still a very raw prospect, and it definitely is a long way to develop and grow before he's ready to be a starting caliber player. Now, safeties, we held on to 4 safeties this season. We got Tracy Walker and Will Harris looking at the starting positions. Those are 2 guys that we expected to be starters, expected to be big-time role players for the Detroit Lions defense. They both made the roster after really solid preseasons, and then Dean Marlowe and CJ Moore also made the roster. CJ Moore is a player that Dan Campbell was very excited about in this offseason, and of course Dean Marlowe, being a free agent that we just signed, having a very solid preseason of his own right, absolutely earned a spot. Now, special teams is a little bit weird because the Detroit Lions went from having 2 kickers to 0 kickers. The only 2 special teams members on the roster right now are Jack Fox, the punter, and Scott Daly, the long snapper. There is not currently a kicker on the roster to my knowledge. They're definitely going to sign one. Zane Gonzalez is on the practice squad, and I know for a fact that he is protected in week 1, so he could always be pulled up. He could always be brought on as those extra 2 players in the regular season to be the kicker, but overall, I'm not entirely sure how the kicking situation is going to work out in Detroit. But with all that being said, that is the Detroit Lions' initial 53. It's a very interesting roster. It's a very young roster. I believe the Detroit Lions' average age right now is 24 years old, or just over 24 years old. They're the youngest roster in the NFL by quite a large margin. They are young, but they are talented. They are raw and inexperienced, but they do have they do have a long way to go for sure, but they definitely have the talent. They definitely have a very bright future. And if all of these players can develop and grow as a team, you're looking 1 year, 2 years down the line, this could be a very scary team with a lot of chemistry. This team is raw. This team is inexperienced. This team is incredibly young, as I said, being the youngest team in the NFL, but you give them a year or 2 to develop. You give them a year or 2 to adapt to the NFL or adapt to NFL speed, because again, a lot of these guys are rookies, first or second year players. You give them a year to adjust to the NFL. You give this coaching staff a year to build up their vision of this team, and you give each and every one of these players a year or 2 to develop while adding and continuously bringing in more and more and more talent over the next offseason or 2. You're going to be left with a very dangerous Detroit Lions team. I think this year they're going to be a very competitive team. Again, they're inexperienced, but they're good, right? Jared Goff's a quality quarterback. DeAndre Swift's a quality running back. Williams and St. Brown are both quality wide receivers. So is Quintez Cephus. TJ Hockenson is a top 4, maybe even borderline top 3 tight end in the NFL. Decker's top 10. Jackson, I'd say, is top 15 at the worst. Ragnow's top 1. Sewell is, definitely is a long way to go, definitely very raw, but has all the potential in the world, has the potential to be a top 5, even maybe a top 5, or it has the potential to be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 tackle in the NFL in a couple of years, right? Brocker's a veteran. McNeil showed a lot. Levi showed a lot. Deshaun Hand has shown flashes. John Pennicini showed flashes. Kevin Strong showed flashes. Flowers is consistently at like 8 sacks. Romeo Okwara is coming off a 10-sack season, being a very young player. Julian Okwara is coming off a really, really good preseason. Derek Barnes flashed in the preseason. Jamie Collins is really solid. Alex Anzalone has a skill. Jeff Okudah is young. Amani's young. AJ Parker's great. Iffy's great. Walker is young and really good. Will Harris has looked to take a lot of big steps forward this offseason. So yes, they're a young team, and yes, they may not win 8 games. Yes, they may not break 500. Yes, they may not make the playoffs, but they're young, they're talented, and they're going to grow as a team. And I truly think that this team is going to be competitive, and give them a year or 2 to develop and grow and add a little bit more talent and a little bit more depth to this roster. You're going to see a really good Detroit Lions team in the future, and this roster is the first step to getting there. Now, with all that being said, that is it for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below below what you think about the roster. What do you think about the first 53 for the Detroit Lions? I'd be very curious to hear what you guys think about it and what you guys think about the direction that this team is heading. But with all that being said, that is all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!